The courtroom was silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone present. Judge William Carter, a man known for his unwavering composure, sat behind the bench, his gavel resting beside him. Across the room stood a 10-year-old girl, her small hands gripping the edges of the witness stand. Her eyes, wide yet determined, met the judge's gaze. No one could have predicted what she was about to say. But the moment the words left her lips, the judge's expression changed. His stern face softened, his eyes welled up with tears, and for the first time in his long career, he found himself struggling to maintain his composure. What she said next would not only bring him to tears, but also lead to a decision that would change lives forever. The girl took a deep breath, her voice trembling but clear. "Your Honor," she began, "I just want to ask you something. If you were me, what would you want?" The judge blinked, surprised by the question. He had presided over hundreds of cases, heard countless testimonies, but never had a child asked him something so direct, so simple, yet so powerful. "My mom tells me to be strong," she continued, her small hands still gripping the wooden railing in front of her. "She says everything will be okay. But last night, I heard her crying when she thought I was asleep. I know she's scared. I know she's afraid of what will happen to us." A hush fell over the courtroom. The attorneys, the jury, the audience, everyone was listening, holding their breath. "I don't know all the rules," the girl admitted. "I don't understand the big words in this court. But I know what love is. And I know that my mom loves me more than anything in the world. So I just need to know, do rules matter more than love?" Judge Carter felt a lump in his throat. He had spent decades upholding the law, making decisions based on evidence, precedent, and logic. But at this moment, none of that mattered. The words of this little girl had struck something deep within him, something he had long forgotten, the true purpose of justice. A tear slipped down his cheek as he reached for his gavel. His voice, thick with emotion, carried through the courtroom. "Young lady," he said softly, "thank you for reminding me what truly matters." And with that, he made a decision that would change her life forever. The courtroom remained silent, the weight of the little girl's words hanging in the air. Judge William Carter, a man known for his strict adherence to the law, found himself shaken in a way he had never experienced before. His hands, usually steady as they gripped his gavel, now trembled slightly. He cleared his throat. "Can you tell me more, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice softer than anyone had ever heard in his courtroom. The girl nodded. "My name is Emily Parker. I'm 10 years old, and my mom's name is Sarah Parker." She glanced at her mother, who sat at the defendant's table, her eyes red from sleepless nights and silent prayers. "She's the best mom in the world." Emily's small voice filled the courtroom with a truth that no legal argument could counter. "She works so hard to take care of me. She tucks me in every night and kisses my forehead, even when she's really tired. She gave up everything so we could be safe. But now they want to take me away from her." A murmur spread through the audience. This was a custody case, one of many Judge Carter had seen in his career. Emily's father, who had been absent for most of her life, had recently returned, demanding full custody. His legal team had built a strong case, arguing that Sarah's financial struggles made her an unfit mother. But Emily wasn't talking about money. She wasn't talking about legal definitions of fit or unfit. She was talking about love. She took a deep breath and continued. My dad. I don't really know him. He never came to my birthdays. He never sat with me when I was sick. He never helped me with my homework. She hesitated, her voice quivering. And when he did come to see me, he always looked at his phone more than he looked at me. Her father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His lawyer whispered something in his ear, but he said nothing. Emily turned back to the judge. I know people say kids don't understand grown-up problems, but I do. I know my mom isn't rich. I know she works 2 jobs and sometimes skips dinner so I can eat. But she loves me, and I love her. She swallowed hard, fighting back tears. So, Your Honor, if you were me, where would you want to be? Judge Carter felt a tear roll down his cheek. He had once believed that the law was clear, that it was his job to follow it without emotion. But at this moment, he realized something profound. The law was meant to serve people, not the other way around. He took a deep breath and turned toward Emily's mother. Mrs. Parker, would you like to say something? Sarah Parker hesitated, then stood. Her hands trembled as she spoke. Your Honor, I don't have fancy lawyers or a big house, but I have my daughter and she has me, and I will fight for her with everything I have. Her voice cracked, because that's what love does. The judge glanced at Emily's father, who looked away, avoiding his gaze. Then he turned back to the little girl who had reminded him what justice truly meant. He picked up his gavel. Emily, thank you for speaking from your heart. He looked at her mother and then at the attorneys. After careful consideration, I have made my decision. A long pause filled the room. And then, he brought the gavel down. The gavel's sharp crack echoed through the silent courtroom. Every breath seemed to be held. Every pair of eyes locked on Judge Carter as they awaited his decision. He exhaled slowly, his fingers tightening around the edges of his bench. This case is about more than just legal technicalities, he began, his voice firm but carrying a warmth it had never held in prior rulings. It's about a child's well-being, about the meaning of family, and most of all, about love. Emily's mother clutched her hands together, whispering silent prayers, while her father sat motionless, his expression unreadable. Judge Carter turned toward Emily. Young lady, you asked me a question. If I were you, where would I want to be? His lips pressed together for a moment before he answered. I would want to be with the person who has loved me, protected me, and put my happiness above everything else. A soft gasp rippled through the courtroom. Emily's mother's eyes filled with tears. Judge Carter continued, his tone now carrying the weight of finality. This court will always consider the legal framework, but we must never forget that justice is not just about laws. It is about doing what is right. He looked toward Sarah Parker. Mrs. Parker, I see the sacrifices you have made for your daughter, the unwavering love and care you have given her, and I see the bond you share, one that no legal argument can break. Sarah covered her mouth with her hands, her body shaking as tears spilled from her eyes. Emily gripped the wooden railing tighter, holding her breath. Then, at last, Judge Carter gave his verdict. This court denies Mr. Parker's petition for full custody. Emily Parker will remain with her mother. A moment of silence, and then Emily ran. She rushed straight into her mother's arms, burying her face against her chest, sobbing in relief. Sarah wrapped her arms around her daughter, whispering over and over, "We did it, baby. We did it." Somewhere in the courtroom, someone sniffled. A woman dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Even the court clerk, who had seen hundreds of cases, blinked back tears. But the moment was not over. Judge Carter wasn't finished. He turned toward Emily's father, who had sat stiffly throughout the entire exchange. "Mr. Parker," he said, his tone measured, "this court recognizes your rights as Emily's father, but parental rights come with responsibilities. You say you want to be in your daughter's life, but presence is not just a legal term, it is a commitment." Emily's father shifted in his seat. For the first time since the case began, he truly looked at his daughter. Not as a name in a custody petition, not as someone he had a claim over, but as a little girl who had stood in a courtroom, begging for love to be valued over law. Judge Carter continued, "If you want to be in Emily's life, you will have to prove that with actions, not just words." He set down his gavel. "And I hope, for Emily's sake, that you do." A heavy silence filled the courtroom before Emily's father finally nodded. He looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and for the first time his expression wasn't distant or distracted. It was unsure, maybe even regretful. Emily turned in her mother's arms to look at him. For a moment no one spoke. Then, softly, Emily whispered, "Dad." He swallowed hard. "Yeah, kid." She hesitated before speaking again. "Are you gonna try?" He opened his mouth, closed it, looked down. Then, after a long pause, he met her gaze. "I want to." His voice was barely audible. "I don't know how, but I want to." Judge Carter nodded slightly, as if recognizing the first step of something that might one day be called redemption. And then the moment was over. Emily turned back to her mother, who kissed the top of her head. As they walked out of the courtroom, hand in hand, Sarah whispered, "We're going home." Emily smiled. "Yeah, home." The courtroom doors swung open, flooding the hallway with light. But the story was not over yet. Because healing is not a verdict. It is a journey. And for Emily and her family, that journey had just begun. The autumn sun cast a warm glow over the courthouse steps as Emily and her mother stepped outside. Sarah took a deep breath, as if for the first time in years, the weight on her shoulders had been lifted. Emily squeezed her mother's hand, her heart still racing from everything that had just happened. Behind them, Emily's father, Michael Parker, lingered in the doorway, watching them. He had expected to leave today victorious in the legal sense, but instead he was leaving with something far more uncertain: a choice. For years he had been absent, and now, for the first time, he truly saw the impact of that absence. Not in legal documents or court arguments, but in the way his daughter had spoken, how she had fought for her mother with words that no lawyer could have crafted. He had never deserved that kind of love, but maybe, just maybe, he could try to. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. First, nothing changed. Sarah remained cautious, keeping her distance from Michael unless it involved something necessary for Emily. Michael, on the other hand, struggled with what to do next. He had spent so much time believing he had a right to be in Emily's life, but now he realized that being a father wasn't about claiming something, it was about earning it. So he started small. A phone call here and there. a birthday card hand-delivered instead of mailed, a seat in the back row at Emily's school play, and eventually, one cold December morning, a knock on the door. Sarah hesitated before opening it. Michael stood outside, hands in his pockets, looking uncertain. I was wondering if I could take Emily for a hot chocolate or something. Sarah studied him carefully. He wasn't demanding. He wasn't entitled. He was trying. After a long pause, she called over her shoulder, "Emily, do you want to go?" Emily peeked from behind her mother, studying her father for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. And just like that, something shifted. Their relationship wasn't perfect. There were still awkward silences, missed calls, and moments when Emily didn't know how to act around her father. But there were also little victories. Michael started showing up, really showing up. He listened when Emily talked. He learned about her favorite books, helped her with school projects, and even sat through an entire dance recital without checking his phone once. Sarah, meanwhile, remained protective, but she softened because she saw something she never expected. She saw change. One evening, after dropping Emily off, Michael lingered at the doorstep. "Sarah," he said hesitantly, "I know I can't erase the past, but I want to be better for her. I don't want her to fight for love. I want her to know it's always there." Sarah studied him for a long moment. Then, with a small nod, she said, "Then keep showing up." And he did. Years later, Emily would look back on that day in court as a turning point, not just in her custody case, but in her life. She would remember the moment the judge wiped away a tear and made a decision based not just on the law, but on love. She would remember how her mother held her tightly on the courthouse steps, whispering, "We're going home." And she would remember how, against all odds, her father had finally chosen to stay. Because justice had not just been served that day. Love had been given a second chance. And that made all the difference.